All right, the question I have for you guys is, have you ever felt left out? Have you ever felt excluded? Anybody here not ever had that experience? I think we've all had that experience of feeling left out. I was in 7th grade, and I was in a very small school. It was a Christian school. And so in the upper grades, I think there were upwards of maybe 15 of us. And all of the girls decided one day, led by the 8th grade, my best friend, I thought she was my best friend, and she was the one 8th grader, and she led all the other girls to have this, they decided that they just didn't want to be my friend, and they started to exclude me. And it was really painful. It was one of those, like, they were the only, I mean, it was a small school, so here I was, and the guys were being guys, as junior high guys are, and it was really painful. And at the time, Pastor George, who actually, he was going to be here today, so who knows about George, but he married J.B. and I, and he was my pastor at the time, and he saw one day that I was feeling down, and he said, "Hey, how are you doing? Because you look like you are having a really rough time. Welcome, guys, come on in." And I said to him, I started crying, and I said, "Yeah, and this is what is happening." And he has twin daughters, and they were part of this girl crew. And he said, "Okay, we're all getting together. We're all going to have a conversation." And so he sat us all down. I remember exactly where I was, exactly what it smelled like, felt like, all those things. And here is George, and he's saying, "All right, we all are going to figure this out." And the one thing I took away, we all got all blah, crying, whatever, and hugged, and woo, made up, and everything was pretty good as junior high can be from that point forward. And, but the thing that really I took away from that experience was that George, what he taught me in that moment was, not only was I deeply loved, I counted. What I did counted. I mattered. I was valuable, and also that I needed to understand and grasp my value and really hold on to that. And that way, there was probably going to be more value that came to me because of it, because I valued myself. So that worth thing was such a big deal. Did I grasp it well enough to not ever struggle with it again? Because it still happens to this day. But it was such a great valuable tool that he gave me. All right, so now I want you to think of a time when you felt included, connected, valued, loved. Does that feel different? A lot different. There's peace to it. There's connection to it. There's that value and that worth. People love me, and I love them. So, as interesting as this statement is, the scriptures, ancient scriptures, the Bible, they include all sorts of incredible things about inclusion. I know that sounds crazy because the Old Testament, if you're looking at it from like the hardcore stories, it doesn't feel very inclusive. But it's so full of these beautiful clues all along the way in scriptures about the importance and the value and how God self wants us to include. And we are included. And we're not just normal people, whatever that means. What's normal is sitting on the dryer. All people are included. The oppressed, the marginalized. And what I found so interesting along with all my studies along the way is that women, the value of being included, women are included in the Bible. And again, that's a crazy concept. because you wouldn't think so. Because think about it. Whew, the Bible can sound pretty hardcore about women if you look at it from the surface. But there are, not only are there pieces along the way in the Bible about women. Hagar, she was a slave. She was, had a child, and Sarah and Abraham, long story, talk about that at another time. But she is sent away by Sarah because Sarah is really jealous of her. And guess what? God of the universe, goes and talks to her and calls her by name. There is no other historical document or anything that says anything about any other God speaking to a woman, calling her by name. That's pretty huge if you ask me. So God's self is saying, let's move forward in this. Let's stop the oppression. Let's stop these things, the marginalizing and the exclusiveness. And then there are 2 entire books in the Old Testament that are about women, Esther and Ruth. And today I want to talk about Ruth. Now, this ancient story of Ruth is all about, now this is a spoiler alert in case you've never read it. I highly recommend you reading it. It's very interesting. This is about an outsider becoming an insider. And this is, the history of this book is really quite interesting to me. First and foremost, it's in the Hebrew scriptures. So you have the entire Old Testament is all included in the Jewish scriptures, but plus they have some other things that are included in there too. And in the Jewish scriptures, this part of it is called the Tanakh. And this Ruth was a scroll that was read during the time of the Festival of the Harvest every single year. And it still is read to this day during the harvest of the festival. The Festival of the Harvest. And the Festival of the Harvest is, of course, when there's harvest. So there's that. Now biblical scholars think that it was written sometime between 1035 BC and 530 BC. So, it was a long time ago. And they're not sure about the time because the language looks as if it has been redacted. In other words, they've gone back and they added some things and took some things away because of the way the language looks. And they think it was written after Israel had returned to Jerusalem following their release from Babylon. And that was the intention of this book, was to show that foreigners, those who were not Israelites, that were not insiders, were allowed to marry, the Israelites were allowed to marry anybody who wasn't an insider. So that's an interesting little side note. Okay, so what is this book all about? Naomi and Elimelech. So I had to do this. Elimelech in the desert. Because that name is weird. But anyway, so Elimelech is Naomi's husband, and Ruth, we'll find out this later too, we'll have more details about this, but she's the daughter-in-law. So at the time, Naomi and Elimelech and their 2 sons, they are living in Bethlehem. Now Bethlehem is modern-day Palestine. So it gives you an idea where it is. This is the Dead Sea, this is modern-day Palestine, this is Jerusalem. And so they were going from Bethlehem, where they were having extreme famine and a drought. And over here, there was plenty of water, plenty of good stuff going on in Moab. So they traveled all the way from Bethlehem to Moab. Now it was only 50 miles, but it was over rugged terrain, and they were walking. So you can imagine that, walking over rugged terrain with 2 small sons. So they are going to Moab. Now Moab is a place where the Israelites would never go. They were, are you having issues with it? Okay. They were hated by the Israelites. And they didn't really like the Israelites either. They had been in major conflict. The Moabites they worshipped Chemosh, and Chemosh was a brutal god that asked for child sacrifice. So this is where they went. They went from here to Moab, into this very unknown place, looking for, survival. It was survival at the time. And what's interesting about this is that you wouldn't think that the 50 miles would be very treacherous or rugged when you're just looking at the map from above, when they had the terrain stuff. But it's pretty rough in here. So here they go through this. They're saying, okay, we're going to go here. We're going to start over. We're going to find something that we're not getting here. We're going to live. We're going to be able to eat. Elimelech, he dies. So there's still the two sons. They end up marrying Moabite women. And 10 years later, they die. So there are these 3 women that are left alone, that have no man to protect them, because back then, if you were a woman without a husband or someone to protect you, you probably were not going to make it. You would probably, something terrible would probably happen to you. So Naomi says, I'm going to go back to Bethlehem. I'm going to take this trip. I'm going to go back to Bethlehem. And Orpah and Ruth, the daughter-in-laws, they say, we'll come with you. So they're along their way a little bit. They're probably about around here somewhere. And Ruth and Orpah are following along, and Naomi says, let's stop here. You guys are coming to a place, you're foreigners, who knows what's going to happen. I don't know if you will be included. I don't know what's going to happen for you. You're really risking a lot. Orpah decides to go back home, and Ruth decides to keep going. And Ruth says to her, wherever you go, I will go. And so she chooses to trust Naomi. She chooses to go with her. She trusts her without borders, because there is this crossing over the boundary line. She chose to cross over the boundary line into a place she had no idea about except for what Naomi and, of course, probably her husband had told her. And when they enter Bethlehem, they make quite a splash, because here is this the Naomi that we know coming back? And they say, are you the Naomi? And she says, yes, but no longer call me Naomi. Call me Mara, for it means bitterness, because my life has become bitter. It's probably something that you guys have felt at some point in your life. You can remember a time that it would have been really easy to become bitter. I know for me that I haven't experienced loss like Naomi and Ruth did, but I certainly have experienced pain. I've experienced hopelessness, and I had to choose to become better or stay bitter. It's just really easy to stay bitter and grumpy and just stay in that space because I've been hurt. So the choice to become better or bitter. It's really interesting, this thing about pain. Pain is actually proof that you're alive, but boy does it suck. Leprosy. Leprosy is where you don't feel your limbs. And because you don't feel your limbs, you may be walking around and you have a stone in your shoe and it turns into a sore, and then that sore turns into gangrene, and then you lose your foot. That's leprosy, because you can't feel pain. You die because you can't feel pain. Now they have this day and age that you can survive leprosy. But it used to be, if you were a leper, that was it. And following my brain surgery, there was a lot of pain, but I was alive. And so I had way more joy about being alive than worry about the pain. Pain is proof that there is life. Pain is proof that there is life. You can get through anything, betrayal, any emotional, physical pain, emotional pain, because on the other side of it, there can be hope. there can be joy, there can be inclusion and connection and all of those beautiful things. Okay, so we're picking up the story here at the climax of the story. We are picking it up in chapter 3. So a few things have happened. There's only 4 chapters, super small book. So there's a few things that have happened before this. But what's really interesting about this book is that it's written in chiastic form, literary structure. Chiasm is a literary structure. And I love chiasms. There are so many cool chiasms in the Bible, and the coolest chiasm in the Bible is that the whole Old Testament points towards Jesus, and the whole New Testament points back at Jesus. And that is the peak of the chiasm right there. So there are multiple books, and then inside of books there are chiasms throughout the Bible. It's very clever because the whole idea is the author of the story wants you to know what the most important thing is. So chapter 3 is the most important part of the entire book of Ruth. It's all cool, but chapter 3 is the most important point, and chapter 3 is written in chiastic structure, and so we're going to find the most important point from chapter 3 as well. So this is the exclamation point. Chiasm has the exclamation point for the story. It starts, the chiasm, what they generally look like is they start with something and they end with something that matches. And then it goes through like this, and I'm going to show you that at the very end. You'll see what I'm talking about in this particular chapter. So we're going to take a closer look. I'm going to read from my Message Bible because it is one of the easiest to understand. It's actually, this particular Message Bible doesn't even have, in the original writings, they don't break it up into chapters, they don't break it up into verses. It's like a novel. It's like you're reading it like you would read a novel. So I love that about this, and it's in our more current language. So one day, her mother-in-law, Naomi, said to Ruth, "My dear daughter, isn't it about time I arranged a good home for you so you can have a happy life? And isn't Boaz our close relative, the one whose young women you've been working with? Maybe it's time to make our move. Tonight is the night of Boaz's barley harvest at the threshing floor. Take a bath, put on some perfume, get all dressed up, and go to the threshing floor." We all know what that means. "But don't let him know you're there until the party is well underway and he's had plenty of food and drink." Did you know that the Bible was X-rated? I'm sure you did. Well, and so when you see him slipping off to sleep, watch where he lies, and then go there, lie at his feet, to let him know that you are available to him for marriage. Then wait and see what he says. He'll tell you what to do. All right. So Naomi isn't simply looking for security. She is wanting rest for Ruth and for her because they're tied together, right? In the original language, Hebrew, the word for, there's the phrase, seek some security. The word is manoash, which means state or condition of rest. A place where Ruth doesn't have to continue to toil and suffer under poverty. Wow. Security. Inclusion. In Ruth 2, the chapter before this, we have already seen that Boaz and Ruth, they know each other, and Boaz has allowed Ruth, he's a very wealthy landowner, and he's allowed Ruth to glean the barley from behind the harvesters, and he has also told the harvesters, the workers, to protect Ruth. Remember, she's an outsider, she's a Moabite, she is a heathen, she's a pagan, for all these people. And the other women that are involved in this harvesting, the gleaning, not the harvesting, but the gleaning, she keeps a bit away from them because, again, she's not really accepted by everybody. But Boaz, he says, I want you to protect her, and he protects her. So Ruth, here she is, she's being told to do this. So let's see what happens here. Here we go. Boaz had a good time eating and drinking his fill. He felt great. Then he went off to get some sleep, lying down at the instep of the barley. Ruth quietly followed. She lay down to signal her availability for marriage. Look at that. In the middle of the night, the man was suddenly startled and sat up. Surprised, there was a woman at his feet. And he said, "Who are you?" He says, "Who are you? Who are you indeed?" Well, so not only does Ruth respond confidently, she knows that she can trust Naomi. She goes there and she's doing this, she goes up to I say up because the threshing floor was always up on the top of a hill where the wind would blow the best. And so they would be tossing, when they're harvesting, they're tossing the barley and the chaff would blow away, and that's how they did it. And so it was up at the top of a hill, which is pretty cool. I didn't actually know that. And then they would bundle up the stuff, they would gather it all up and put it in big piles. And they would then, at the harvest time, when the harvest was done, they would make sure that they protected it. We'll get there in a minute. So the Feast of the Harvest, when that was held, all of the workers' families would join in with this celebration, and they'd all be there. So there were going to be a lot of people there when Ruth was going to be going. She goes down, she says, "I'll do it. I'm going to go to the threshing floor," and takes a huge risk. Because not only is she taking the risk of going somewhere because she's a Moabite and an outsider, she's also going to do something, she's going to go do something that could get her stoned. Because she's going to lay at Boaz's feet. And so here she is, and with the harvest, these men, all the men that had been partying together, would go and lay with their heads towards the grain and their feet out. So they were all going to be there too. So she had to be clever about how she was going to do this. Naomi really trusted her a lot, and she trusted Naomi a lot to do this. This sounds very scary to me. So she was very bold. So here we are now. We're at the climax. We are at verse 9. Verses 9 through 13. This is the climax of the story. Ruth is doing everything. But let's see what might be different. She tells Boaz, "I am Ruth, who made me. Take me under your protective wing. You're my close relative. In the circle of covenant redeemers, you do have the right to marry me." So she does everything that Naomi asked her to do, except for one little thing. She ends up not waiting for Boaz to tell her what to do, but she takes the bull by the horns and she tells Boaz what to do. You know, carpe diem, seize the day. Jamie and I met on January 10, 33 years ago. We met through friends, and we enjoyed our time together, and Jamie was headed out the door at the end of the movies, and I said, "You can take me home." Seize the day, seize the day. I didn't quite ask him to marry me, but I certainly did. I did seize the day. So in the ancient Near East, when a man placed his garment over a woman, it was a symbol of marriage. He was saying, "I am going to marry this woman." Ruth switches it up, asks him to put the garment, the cloak, on her, and basically says, "I want you to marry me." Well, Ruth is assertively taking initiative. She is not the victim. Being in God's story does not mean that we are passively letting things happen to us. And even though she was a foreigner or an outsider, she jumps into this story and she becomes a very important part of this story. And I know that as she completely banished the social roles that had been given to her, those social roles were daughter-in-law, pagan, Moabite, leaner, outsider. And guess what? She says, no, She says, "I am going to change this up." and she becomes a part of the tribe and an insider. So back to the story. We have, God bless you, my dear daughter. What a splendid expression of love. And when you could have your pick of any young man in the world, around. And now, dear daughter, don't worry about a thing. I'll do all you could want or ask. Everybody in town knows what a courageous woman you are, a real prize. You're right. I am the close relative. I am your kinsman and redeemer. And stay the rest of the night. In the morning, I will go and find out. I will go through the customary rites. And there is one that's closer. And I will ask him if he wants to be your kinsman and redeemer. And then I will let you know. There was one other. So here he is. He says, I got you, girl. I will be your kinsman redeemer. And he says he would embrace the role if the closer male relative chose not to do it. And the term covenant redeemer is used, which was a very familiar term to the Israelites because of the Mosaic law. Deuteronomy is the Mosaic law, and in that law it says, I want you to care for the oppressed, the marginalized, the women. And if somebody dies, then whoever's the closest relative will take her on and will care for her and give her security. He was the kinsman. He was this person. So they were very familiar with this. No other gods around that time. You do realize that every single person believed in God at this time in ancient history, right? So all these gods, but no other god ever did that. No other god ever said, let's make it so that these people who are excluded and marginalized are going to be included and loved and valued, a valued member of society. So, wrapping this story up, Ruth slept at his feet until dawn. She got up She got up while it was still dark and wouldn't be recognized. Then Boaz said to himself, no one must know that Ruth came to the threshing floor. Of course, because she could be stoned. That's how bad this was. And so he says, bring me your shawl. And she spreads it out and he pours it full of barley. And he says, take this back to Naomi. When she comes back, she gets back to Naomi and Naomi asks her, how did it go? Ruth told her everything that the man had done for her, adding, and he gave us barley besides 6 quarts. He told me, you can't go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. Naomi said, sit back and relax. Wow, sit back and relax, my dear daughter, until we find out how things turn out. That man isn't going to fool around. Mark my words, he's going to get everything wrapped up today. Oh, that's a beautiful thing. So, this is a very, very artful telling of outsider to insider. Ruth's faithfulness garnishes not only protection and security, but also garnishes Elimelech's legacy. And if you continue reading to chapter 4 shows us Boaz marries Ruth. And guess what? They have a son. How cool is this? And the women in the village, who of course weren't so sure if they liked her, she was kind of that. They actually say, and this daughter-in-law who has brought him into the world, the baby, and loves you so much, why she's worth more than 7 sons. That's huge. Women were not worth anything, and here she's worth 7 sons. Boaz assures Ruth that he is invested in her security. And what's really interesting is this security that he's offering. See, this is my thinking. There's probably that other kinsman redeemer. His wife said, you're not bringing that Moabite woman into my house, right? Nobody wants that kind of crazy. I mean, at least in my thinking. But Boaz, he's single. And he also, it seems to me that he also already had this love of her and this respect for her and this value of her that just seems so crazy. Well, that's how God works. God self offers us protection,
security, inclusion, and profound legacy of love. So chapter 3 highlights not only how Ruth is redeemed, but it also shines the light on her character of faith and loyalty. She is highly favored. And what's the coolest thing? Great joy comes from defeat. And she becomes the great-great-grandmother of King David, of David and Goliath fame. And even more profound, talk about legacy and inclusion. Her name is listed in the genealogy of Jesus, the lineage of Jesus. There are 4 other women that are listed in there. They never listed women. The Israelites never listed women in their scriptures in the lineage. It was always men. And so these women are included in the lineage. We matter. We all matter. Everybody matters. Everybody's included. Everybody is loved. And that whole thing is a story for some other time. So the 3 very important points that I want you to come away with today is the inclusion of Ruth in the Old Testament and the fact that she's in Jesus' genealogy speaks to a God that is inclusive, speaks to a God who loves the insiders as well as the outsiders, loves the outsiders as much as the insiders. And I want to give a little side note here. Y'all know that if you're Christian, we're all outsiders unless you have Jewish blood running through you. We're all outsiders. The cool thing is we're all insiders too. So, number 2, with the guidance of God's self, Ruth's trust without borders created good out of bad, legacy out of loss, and insiders out of outsiders. You are included, you are valued, you are loved. And this is how God works from ancient writings. You get this incredible chiastic structure where the climax of the story, the most important part of the story, verses 9 through 13, talk about inclusion and security. And if you look at this, you can see down here, this is the beginning, verse 1 through 4, security desired, and then verse 16 through 18, security promised. See that? And then here, 5 and 6, Ruth follows Naomi's instructions, and 15, receives rich reward for following Naomi's instructions. And then verses 7 and 8, Ruth exposes Boaz's feet and lays down, and 14, Ruth lays at Boaz's feet and slips away quietly, and then the climax of the story. How cool is that? Like, this is old writing. This is ancient. And look at the cleverness that is there and the beauty that is there. Because the climax of the story, the climax of the entire book of Ruth is that we are included. We are protected. We are loved. We are valued. You are included. You are valued. You are honored. You count. We count. And what we do matters and counts. And choosing to trust God without borders can change your life. Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters wherever you would call me. Take me deeper than my feet could ever wander. May my faith be made stronger in the presence of my Savior. Spirit, lead me where my faith is without